Welcome to the video, Final Thoughts on Designing. There are so many activities to choose among. I hope you keep expanding your toolkit by looking at my handouts, but also just talking to any and everyone, going to tons of workshops, particularly when you're at conferences. You can ask people who's an engaging, powerful presenter, and just keep collecting up new ideas and bring them to our live calls, because I really want to keep adding new strategies and tools to my own toolbox. And so just a couple final thoughts. I want to encourage you to just get regrounded in the question, where are the participants? What's the context that you're designing the workshop for? And so these continuums might be useful. Again, as you're doing needs assessment or throughout the session, you're asking, how ready are they to really learn what they asked for? How open are they to learning the outcomes that we negotiated? Are they willing to engage, lean in, be brave? How is that shifting over time? And at least my opinion is these shift closer to 10. But if you notice people are pulling back, then again, that's more of a facilitation conversation. What do you do? But always having these ideas as you're designing and then as you're in the workshop. What's the current capacity of their knowledge? Statistics, concepts. What's their self-awareness, their own understanding of how they fit into the concepts that skills are teaching? Where's the capacity around the skills and tools you're teaching? And action, demonstrated capacity to take meaningful action to create real change. What's their capacity on knowledge, self-awareness, skill, capacity to take action? And you can do a whole bunch of different continuums. The other one I wanted to talk about was resistance. Where are they around? It's related to openness and willingness, but also just what's been the anticipated resistance before, and did it show up? And as you're talking to leaders and your contact, what do you anticipate the resistance might be given the current context of the organization, the nation, or this topic? What's gone on recently in other workshops? And so just to get that, and again, you can get that for people in privilege as well as marginalized groups, different types of categories of difference, privileged, marginalized. But to really be thinking, who are they? And then as we get on our live calls, you can come with questions about, so what would you do if people are low readiness and willingness, low capacity, high resistance? What if they're in the middle capacity and low resistance? Same topic, what could you do differently? And we can brainstorm and think about that and help us design for the next several months you're in the course. Now, if you have no idea, for instance, you're doing a regional workshop or something on campus, your organization where anybody can come. If it's an organization that's wide open participation, you can kind of get some ideas given where they are as an organization and their understanding of readiness, willingness, capacity, resistance. But at conferences, it's a scattershot. And so I generally plan for the middle. 0 to 10, I'm planning for 3, 4, maybe 5. I don't meet many people that are 8, 9, and 10. So middle to me is 3 and 4. And I have materials in my handouts for people who are low, early in awareness, and also even higher. So if they're getting bored, they can flip through and be learning passively while I'm doing something else. People look at the handouts. I don't challenge them. I trust they're doing what they need to do. I also believe that if you keep mixing up the small groups and you have a variety, potentially, of folks along this continuum, they could be teaching each other and learning from each other, particularly if you ask for a small group facilitator to help the conversation, help applying the skill. Because more than often than not, someone who is middle to early high will be the one volunteering. If they're new to this, they're probably so into the fight, flight, freeze, flounder, they're not going to raise their hand to volunteer to be a group facilitator. So that's another way that you can honor the folks that have more experience, more knowledge, more capacity, and put them in a little f facilitator, little t teacher role. Again, I never set people up and ask them to teach. A, I don't think it's their role. B, I don't know the quality of what they're teaching. But if they're helping people have a conversation, that may keep them engaged, and they may offer a few things that are more advanced as well. Now, occasionally I have in the room had people on a continuum from 0 to 10 who's new to this, who's moderate, who's got a lot of experience and knowledge. And I'll have them honestly take a stand. If I was teaching about navigating difficult situations, I might do that. And then you can make small groups. You say, have at least, maybe 2 people who are low, couple moderate, and a couple mid to high. So that's one way to do it. Or you can have people turn to someone they're near, groups of 2 or 3, and then talk about X, talk about this case study. In that way, you're trusting that people have some knowledge and they may have underrated where they are, or it's just good to talk about, I have no idea, it's scary, with someone else who understands. Someone taught me some theory in my master's program in student personnel. I think it was Sanford, but I could be wrong. The +1, that most people can understand an idea or a skill one step farther than they are. +1. And so if you mix groups up with low, medium, and high capacity, again, they've rated themselves, some of the things said may be way far off, but then if the folks who are newer to it ask questions, that gives folks moderate and high to then share some ideas. So there's a benefit to doing it either way. So just some ideas when you're scattershot, you just don't know. Oh, that might be a violent analogy now that I hear it, so I'll try to come up with another one. Just when you don't know. Try to have stuff for all, and then strategically as you move through, and we can talk about this more in facilitation, if the group shows you X, then how can you shift a basic activity and like they're more advanced, so how do I shift it in the moment? Breathe. I now just want to say a few things about using music, poetry, spoken word, dramatic reading, theater. I tend to like acting out, and so I do it just naturally in the moment. Other folks may want to have prepared theater pieces or dramatic readings. I want to use music more. Let me start there. Any of these can be very powerful. It shifts the learning method. People have different learning styles, as we talked in an earlier video. Music when people enter, or when they're doing a writing activity, especially if it's a meditative, reflective, having music that may help the mood. Music when they're leaving, so the big coming in, leaving, I like a little more high energy. Reflective would be more meditative music. If you want to use music to have the song lyrics a part of the conversation, you can play the music and or have, if there's a music video, if it's not distracting for any reason. Often those music videos in general have a lot of microaggressions in them, but you could use them as a teaching method. I would always have the lyrics in writing, though. I personally have trouble hearing words in music. Most music, but particularly faster music or music that I've not heard before. All right, poetry. I never use poetry, but I think poetry, spoken word, dramatic readings can be powerful. And I know a lot of my friends and colleagues love poetry. So again, I'd have them in the packet to read along. I have used kind of dramatic reading. It's a reflection from some authors that somebody shared about how to meet people where they are and know that we're all growing. So I will do that at the end of the White Caucus. And what I do is I have participants read kind of one line at a time. So depending upon if it's the content or the energy with which it's read, you could have a video of somebody reading it. You could be the one reading it aloud. You can have participants to read it. You could have a guest come in, particularly if it's their spoken word or dramatic reading, and maybe a video of them doing it. And always have in writing, in my opinion, so people can read along. All different learning styles at once. And finally, I want to talk about theater. You might have heard of Theater the Oppressed or other variations thereof of all kinds of groups. And if you're in a moderate to large city, I bet someone near you has a theater troupe that is already doing work around equity, inclusion, social justice, and you can have them come in and they can do their own situation scenarios. You can tell them, here are 10 from our organization that we'd like you to think about doing. And like we talked about in How Do You Teach a Skill or Concept, instead of having the participants themselves develop the skit, you have then a theater troupe do it. And they develop, they can do a more complex, a lot more nuances, a minute or two, maybe even 3 of dynamics, pause, have folks analyze it, and then what would you do? And then the audience tells them how to respond. And so live, these actors can then engage in the ways that the audience is coaching them. You can also do this with participants. I just think you would need folk who are willing to and skilled. So people are more moderate or early to high competence to take quick coaching do this, and then to be able to do it. I've been doing this a long time, and I still feel stumped sometimes when I hear feedback. Doesn't mean you don't want to ask the participants, but never pick someone and to come up unless they volunteer and they know exactly what they're getting into. You could also use past participants of workshops, if this is something you've done and they're in the organization and they're willing to come in, and you give them the scenarios ahead of time. They can meet and decide who's going to have what role, and they come in and act it out live. We stop. And you can also do videos of past participants doing it. So all kinds of ways to use theater, live and reflective on video, to get people seeing what could you do, what else would you do, those sorts of things. I want to spend just a couple moments on debriefing activities. I believe I talked about it in 3 acts of the play, and you've already read the packet, so you've seen a lot of these concepts. But I just want to underline that using one of these to design your debriefs and do it enough so that you naturally, if something happens, you're stumped and you're doing an activity you haven't planned, that you just know how to first do what happened, feelings, reactions, impact. So what? Insights. How did you make meaning? What happened? Does this occur in the organization? And then the now what? When this happens, what could you do? What are some takeaways from this activity and this discussion? I love it because I can remember that what, so what, now what. And again, I learned that in UMass Amherst. I don't know the original authors, but that's where I learned it. You also had a chance to see Saga from Ohio State, Share, Analyze, Generalize, Apply. And in the packet, I have all kinds of questions in each one. I want to show you how this moves into something new, which I haven't shared yet, but you're probably very familiar with adult learning cycles, experiential learning cycles. I Googled it just yesterday, and there were like 10 different versions. I remember someone teaching me Kolb, K-O-L-B, but as I looked, there were many others and different variations. So however you understand this, these 5 steps are ones that I'm thinking about when I'm designing how I want to debrief. And so you do an activity or you have a discussion, someone tells a story, and then what are your feelings, reactions, the impact from? How are you feeling right now, the impact? And so you can do this when you have an unexpected. I was just recently leading something and someone unexpectedly shared how deeply they're impacted by the current dynamics going on in the world. And so I unconsciously went to tell me more about them, and they shared, and then I asked the group what was the impact of hearing who relates in. If you're doing an experiential activity, you definitely want to then continue to analyze what happened, what did you do when, how'd you feel when, what were your responses when. So they're really beginning to talk about. If you do the playing card activity, I know I want to rush to making meaning, to generalize. But if you do any type of simulation or any type of activity that has restirred emotion or has people, they personally had some experiences, they won't be able to generalize or even analyze until they've shared what card do you think you have and why, or put them in a small group and everyone gets to share what happened to you. That's the analyze. And so they need the time and deserve the time to be able to let out some of that energy as well as to share their experience because it was meaningful for them. And then once you do all that, then the group might be willing and able to say, so how do you make meaning of what just happened? What felt familiar to what happens in the organization? What does all this mean about effective meetings, effective X? What are some insights from this experience? So they're literally, there's a metaphor. Someone wrote an article about going to the balcony. And it's what I talk about reflecting on experience. And so instead of being in the experience anymore, you move up the stairs or you move to a higher level and you're watching and reflecting back on what just happened, moving to the balcony. It's an interesting metaphor. And trying to get the making meaning, insights, what are the principles that happened? And then when you're developing your debriefing activities, you're listing how you want to do that. You also want to have them for applying. And that's the last part of the adult learning cycle. Do, share, analyze, generalize, apply. And this is kind of the now what, if you do the what, so what, now what. But I like Adult Learning Cycle has a few extra ones in there. And so what does this mean for you and your roles? Long ago, someone taught me, what do you want to start doing, stop doing, continue doing, do more of, do less of, however you want to phrase it. They're applying what they just learned to their own work experiences. 3 things you want to take away. And again, you may want to give people a chance to write this down, share with their high five buddy, talk about it in their intact work groups or with other people from their unit that came to a workshop. How do you want to apply it in your practice? I like the next to last one. What do you want to talk to your supervisor and team about? How do you want to take this back to them? How you'll continue to practice learning this skill? Any and all of those. That's probably way too many, or at least for me, but something so that they do the adult learning cycle and you're prepared and you get so good, it's a natural now instinct that you go from share, analyze, generalize, apply. And that also stands for SAGA. So whichever method you want to use, but in your preparation, having 3 to 5 questions in each of those so that they're written down in case you get stumped, you can look down and come back to one. All right, deep breath. I now want to just emphasize open-ended and closed-ended questions. Again, all this is in the handout, but as you're writing them out, you're debriefing questions, then go back and notice how many are closed-ended, how many will solicit a one-word answer. And I tend to avoid those and recommend you do too. People experience them as leading, don't you think that? What's the best answer? What's the most efficient way to do this? All those are closed-ended questions. What's the greatest way we could go back and teach this to others? There are many different ways, at least around equity, inclusion, social justice. I believe it depends on your group memberships, your privileged, marginalized, it depends on the context. And so I want people thinking very complexly. So I rarely use closed-ended questions. Instead, I mostly use open-ended, which give people a lot of space to answer, to reflect, to come up with their own response given everything. So what questions generally? What, how, tell me more, help me understand. Any of those, and you can look at the packet there even more. Now, to be fair, you're probably thinking, yeah, but whenever you say clap once if, those are all closed-ended mostly. I use closed-ended when I want to debrief quickly or at least get the temperature of the room so that I can kind of do a quick needs assessment. How many people were late? Raise your hand if you've seen the same dynamic. It not only helps me, but it helps the room see how pervasive things are. If a person has just shared pretty honestly and vulnerably, it'll help them feel related into. They're not alone. Others have similar experience, so it might build greater bravery, authenticity, trust, deepens the container for deeper engagement. And so I'll do the who relates, who's had similar, who's had a different dynamic, and I do the clap once often or raise your hand or make a noise, depending upon the accessibility dynamics and needs in the room and what I've done before recently and what the group seems to like to do. All right, take a deep breath. Pausing and pace. You're probably laughing right now because you notice I barely pause. I did ask you to breathe. But I trust in the videos you're pausing to take notes or go back, take snapshots of things if you want. I do have a fast pace for some, and I get that feedback. And when the group gives it to me, I try to shift my pace to slow down or have a rhythm that feels slower to me. It still may feel fast to folks. There's going to be a wide range in the room. You got to be reading the room at all times, asking how they're doing, what they need. They'll tell you. If I'm about to end a small group and my gut says they're in it, maybe I'm watching them, I'll say 2 more minutes, 3 more, what do you need? And some people put up their full hand. Sometimes I'll go around to individual groups and ask. And the group that asks for the most, unless it's like 10 to 15 more, then if it's 5, then I'll go with that. It can feel challenging to pause for me or to shift my pace, but it can be incredibly helpful for people who are reflective learners or people even who are extroverts that are kind of quickly thinking how this is going to apply, and they're kind of bouncing. I'm that person. I'm bouncing all over the place, so I might have missed the last comment, and then I have to come back and see where the group is because I've gone off and I'm making up stuff already. people have different reading and writing styles, and so having a pace that's enough for most, if not all people, to complete the activity. And what I'll do is, if I notice that, a third of the room, quote, is done and 2/3 is still writing, I'll say, if you're done, then go back and find the top 3 or 5 you want to share, or the top 3 or 5 you don't want to share, and then choose braver. Pauses really can be used to show a transition. If I slow down and just pause, even for 5 seconds. So that was 5 seconds. It gives people a realization that we might be at a point that we're going to move, or I'm about to emphasize a point. So it can give a little anticipation. Even 5 seconds can give people a time to catch up, reflect, emotionally take a break. If I ask a question and nobody answers, I might pause for 10 seconds, 15. It gives pressure to participate. I may have waited longer before. It depends. If I have the time in a full day, if I don't, then I might just say, I'm noticing no one's responding. What's that about? I have paused when there are distracting dynamics in the room. Side conversations, someone's on their phone, texting. Pausing can also give people space to sit about the impact of what just was shared, especially when someone has just shared, again, either virtually or in person, vulnerably, emotionally. Pause. I'll actually interrupt folks that are trying to come in too soon, especially if they're trying to fix it, or just pause. And I'll even say, let's just pause a moment and just take in and just notice impact on you, what's coming up in you as you heard so powerfully what they just said. So, other ways to pause is you can say, why don't we take a 2-minute stretch? And then you start stretching like I'm doing right now. You can say, why don't we take a 1 function break? And people may not understand what that is. I may or may not explain, but I might say something like, well, if you want something to eat or you just want to quick hit the restroom, just kind of a 1 function break, i.e. don't go smoke a cigarette. This isn't like do 3 different things. It's not a time to check your email and respond. It's just a 2-minute. I'll also pause sometimes by saying, everybody take a deep breath. Just take a couple minutes and just, before we move on, why don't you write down some notes about what you want to remember, what questions you're having, what's coming up for you. Just take a moment and reflect or make some notes. So you can pause in many ways. You can slow down or shift your pace to meet the needs of different kinds of learners in a number of different ways. And if you're paying attention, probably after 30 or 40 minutes, you'll know, if not sooner, the general pace that people like. I bet I unconsciously shift my pace depending upon the room. And then occasionally I'll do a take the pulse. How's my pace? How's this going? And I'll ask people to share, and I'll try to get 4 or 5 or 6 voices and said, anybody disagree with what's said? All right. Before I move to close, I do want to say that you may want to be watching folks that do keynotes, presentations, lectures. If you're in some type of religious organization where people do sermons, I'm not sure what they are called in all the different types of religious organizations. But there are some folk that really use pace, speeding up, slowing down, pause, that really make giving of information engaging and captivating. Their tone. So this may not be of interest to you, but if you are wanting to know more about pausing, pacing, and how to, even in a workshop, do it in a story, be watching people who get your attention and seem to have other people enthralled. Now, my language might be a little too much. This is not my strength. But when I'm with folks that can just tell a story and pause and pace and tone differences, volume differences, in the 12-minute Thai talk, that TED-like talk, that's probably the best I've ever done. But in the script that I practiced for weeks, I wrote in pause. I wrote in so that I would remember to do some of the different ways I'm suggesting. All right. I hope these videos over these first 2 months have provided you much more of a framework and tools and skills on how to think about design, how to really prepare yourself so you do powerful workshops that accelerate the learning and application of all those skills back in the workplace. Over the next 4 months, we're going to now shift to focus on facilitation. Now, you may still have design questions, which is great. So just because you're moved on to facilitation, you can still ask for design, what if, how, I'm doing a whole new workshop. And as we move into the Q&As, we will be having both design and facilitation questions. So anything goes. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.